This program is brought to you by the members of WCNY. Thank you.
Welcome, America, to Balancing Act, the show that aims to tame the political circus of two-party politics. I'm John Katko. This week, is bipartisanship still possible? In the center ring, we'll ask Todd Kashdan, a professor of psychology at George Mason University. Then Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania and Jared Golden of Maine discuss the importance of bipartisanship in politics on the trapeze. And then I'll close with my take. But first, let's walk the tightrope. If bipartisanship feels like a thing of the past, it's worth remembering how some of America's early political figures settled disputes with duels. Most of us don't need to see Broadway's Hamilton to recall that in 1804, Vice President Aaron Burr shot and killed former Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton in a duel. Disagreements ran so deep that leaders were willing to risk their lives over them. But bipartisanship is also central to the American story. At the Constitutional Convention of 1787, large and small states were deadlocked over how Congress could be structured. Aptly named the Great Compromise, broke the stalemate. It created the House and Senate system we still use today. A few years later, in 1803, President Thomas Jefferson, a Democratic Republican who favored limited government, joined with key Federalists to approve the Louisiana Purchase. The deal doubled the size of the nation, even as party divisions ran very high. Fast forward to the depths of the Great Depression. The Social Security Act of 1935, part of the New Deal, created a basic safety net for Americans. It offered benefits for the elderly, the unemployed, dependent children, and those with disabilities. In a national crisis, the parties worked together to meet the moment. Nearly 30 years later, bipartisanship again shaped a defining moral turning point in this country. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed only because a cross-party coalition of Democrats and Republicans broke one of the longest filibusters in Senate history. And bipartisanship isn't just about policy. It's also about people. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan, a conservative Republican, and House Speaker Tip O'Neill, a liberal Democrat, clashed publicly and often. But after 6 o'clock, by O'Neill's own rule, the two shared drinks, traded Irish jokes, and worked out key deals on Social Security and tax reform and immigration, to name a few. Cheers to that. Other landmark bipartisan successes followed. The Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990 passed with overwhelming support from both parties, guaranteeing accessibility and civil rights for millions. And as recently as 2021, a deeply divided Congress still managed to come together to pass a bipartisan infrastructure law, a major investment in roads, bridges, broadband, and clean water systems. And I was proud to have helped get this bill across the finish line. If the leaders of the past could go from taking shots at each other, literally and figuratively, to working out solutions, perhaps today's leaders can put down their weapons of words and do the same. It's a tall order, but one we'll explore with our expert in the center ring. Joining me in the center ring is Todd Kashdan, a professor of psychology at George Mason University. Welcome, Todd, and I want to hear more about your research into bipartisanship in general and how this term curiosity plays in that study again and again.
Yes, so what we've seen by colleagues of mine and ourselves is this rise in what we call political animus, sort of great hatred for people that have disagreeing views than you in the world of politics. We wanted to find a solution. And so we looked at the work on curiosity, the desire to seek out new information, the desire to explore new perspectives, new ideas. And what we uncovered in 3 studies is that people that tend to be more curious, there's different ways of becoming curious. They tend to be less inclined to just spend time with people that share their political views. They're more likely to socialize with people that are different than them. They're more likely to consider the views of other people. They have this sense of intellectual humility and this courage to speak out against what the tides are leaning towards.
So the curious in this country, it seems like they're on the wane as a group of America. It seems like it's far more polarized than it has been in the past. Is that what you found as well?
Yeah, if you look at the spectrum of ideas on a bell curve, you find that over the past 20 or so years is that the margins, the two extremes have become really large, very intense, very vocal. And research that's done at New York University finds that the people that express the most rage or extreme negative emotions, those are the posts that go the most viral. And so it feels like everyone has the same perspective on whatever the political issue is of the day, but it's actually a small minority of people that are making people believe that everyone's at the extreme margins.
I'm curious, what prompted you to do this study?
Well, I've been studying curiosity for 25 years, and then I've also lived near DC, so I've seen the political tides change, and just, mix your peanut butter with my chocolate, just realize, hey, this might be a solution because we need simple, quick strategies that are going to get people to be less defensive, less anxious, and realize that maybe there's some wisdom and knowledge on the other side of the aisle.
When I was in my time in Congress especially, I really found that the media is so segmented now, and gone are the days of the three major networks, and they're all fighting for ratings, and they all were fighting to make sure they were totally non-biased. And now it seems like you can turn on any station and get a steady diet of just what you want to hear. Same with the internet. How does that contribute to this lack of curiosity?
Tremendous amount. It's all what's called motivated reasoning, is that I am seeking out information. So I'll tell people, I follow the science, I follow the evidence, but when people are motivated in their reasoning, they're only limiting particular sources that they know are going to match up with what they think. They're quickly holding very different standards for evidence that is for or against their views. And what we find, which is very exciting, is that people that tend to be more curious are more likely to say, you know what? I'm going to turn on Fox News. I'm going to turn on CNN. I'm going to turn on NBC. I'm going to listen to some random people from Sri Lanka because I want to get the whole perspective of this issue so I can make an idea and an opinion on my own.
So how do you talk to people out there and encourage them to do this? I mean, what's the incentive? Because if some people tell you, if you watch a certain news station, the sky is black, and they're going to say the sky's black even though it's white. I mean, that's just the way it is. So how do you break through that?
So let me tell you about our evidence, which is pretty exciting. So there's this thing called the black sheep effect, and I think a lot of people nod their heads who's listening, is that when someone in the in-group, your friends and allies who think the same way, is like, you know what, maybe we should pause, maybe we're actually not answering this the right way, maybe we're taking too extreme of a view, those people get beaten down, ostracized, and excluded more than people on the other side. They're saying, you're a traitor, you're Benedict Arnold. That happens here. And what we find is when we expose people to the fact that people are less inclined to ostracize you if you disagree with the people in your group, that makes them more inclined to say, oh, if that's the case, then I'm actually going to be a little bit braver and I'm going to be a little bit more open to considering other sources and vantage points and other people that I'm going to include in my social circle because I don't know everything and I'm around smart people.
So that appears to be a dangerous ground, though, isn't it? Because we've heard stories again and again, I have at least, and in fact, it happened to me. People who had disagreed with my politics once I got in office were lifelong friends, and they no longer talk to me because I happen to be a Republican, not a Democrat, and vice versa. It's how do you break through that?
Right. So that's the black sheep effect, and it's real.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we know from 40 years of science is the best way to actually break down the divides between blues and reds, particularly in the United States, is to get people to engage in activities that have nothing to do with the political domain. And in Northern Virginia, where I live, there used to be, or at least still is, these great softball games that happen where you get, Republican and Democratic senators and congressmen and women who are playing a sport. And when they're in between innings, when they're walking back to their cars, that's when real conversations and real friendships take place. And the whole goal is, can you create a friendship outside of politics so it can serve as a sort of force field to protect yourself if you disagree with them within the political realm?
It's funny you say that because I just thought back every morning when I was in Congress, I'd go to the gym about 7 a.m. and there's a bunch of Democrats, a bunch of Republicans, the entire spectrum was there. And that was the one time where they're not like sniping at each other. And actually, you got more work done in the gym while you're working out, chatting with the person
Right.
next to you than you did any other time. So I think you're right about that, you know?
Yeah.
So let me ask you this much. What is wagging the dog more with respect to partisanship? Is it partisan political leaders, or is it partisan political leaders doing what they have to do to get reelected by saying the things they're saying, even if they don't believe it?
So, as a scientist, I like to be precise. I think we're seeing a greater level of over identifying with our political affiliation, as that is the core element of our personality, our character, and a sense of who we are. And the more that we do that, the harder it is to actually look into the backpack with what this identity is and say, there's some things wrong with it. I agree with 83% of my party, but that other 17%, not only do I disagree, but I want to say something. So I really think what's wagging the tail is really this hyper identification. And I hope everyone listening just reduces the impact of what that political view is, as this is you, as opposed to this is one of many things I believe in.
So Todd, tell us, what is the impact of social media on this whole dynamic?
What you find is that the 10% at the absolute extremes of political views, so left and right, just for right now, we'll call it that, those get amplified more than anything else that's happening there, especially in the middle. And so it feels as if everyone is holding the same view, really extreme, like absolute yes, hell freaking no views that happens there. Whereas the vast majority, the silent majority in the middle, are like, sometimes it depends.
Todd, I would talk about being in your tribe, your circle of friends, and you all have similar political views, if you will. I go through this with a lot of my high school friends on our little chat boxing, right? And we have different views, and sometimes you just step back when you go into a different area. But how do you give some advice to people if you're trying to wade into a subject matter that you know people in your tribe may be disagreeing with you on?
I'm so glad you asked this question. Let me give you two really concrete bits of advice right off the bat. One, how is your greatest question you can ask? But the inflection in your voice is absolutely essential, where you're truly showing interest and non-defensiveness. So you would say, I hear what you're saying. It's not how I typically think about it. How would that work? And so you can see in my voice, which is I really care about what you're going to say. I'm not going to challenge it immediately. I'm going to sit and listen to it. And what typically happens is people have these strong views, but don't understand the mechanics of it and might not even know the terms. And so it gets a little bit playful as you realize, I don't even know what fracking means. I don't even know what DEI stands for. I'm not even sure what Marxism is and how it's different from communism. And you want to get there where you can kind of just smirk a little bit and have some humanity.
Yeah,
that's part one.
That's interesting you say that, because a lot of times I think when I say something to my friends or my friends say something to me, we have disagreeing views, our tone of voice changes, or the way we type it out on a text changes, and it gets more aggressive. So you're saying take a non-aggressive stance, and that helps diffuse it and maybe generate a conversation?
And really lean on that how question. The second part, and this is even more important, this relates to all emotionally charged conversations. I call it the discomfort caveat. You can start conversations by saying, I love our relationship. I was not going to say anything, and I'm actually a little bit uncomfortable about revealing this, but just because we're talking about it, bear with me for a second because I might not get the words right. When you have this opening before whatever it is you're going to say, people's defenses come down, they get less anxious, and they become more intrigued of what's so exciting, what's so powerful that you're anxious about in the first place. Of course, you're my friend, whatever you want to say. So instead of just jumping into the topic, open up with how hard it is for you to open your mouth in the first place. And you're going to have basically this fair hearing to whatever view you have.
You know, I look back to the great leaders in our country's history as a student of presidents of the past, and I look at Lincoln, and I look at FDR, and I look at JFK, and I look at Reagan, and even Bill Clinton, his personal shortcomings aside. They all had this common thing, and this common thing was the ability to lead for all Americans. How much of an impact would it be to get someone like that back in the White House again on this whole narrative?
I think what happens is you've now had about 4 cycles of real extremism from one side to the other side. And normally what takes place is the pendulum basically swings too far, and so you have an overcorrection afterwards. If you have multiple overcorrections, I think you just might get to a point where people say, I just want the smartest, most rational person who actually thinks about keeping my family safe, keeping some money in my wallet, my bank account, and making sure that the people that actually deserve to get good jobs.
Todd Cashin from George Mason University, thank you so much. Now let's take to the trapeze. We continue our focus on bipartisanship as we welcome Representative Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania and Representative Jared Golden from Maine, members of the Problem Solvers Caucus, which you're going to learn a lot about in the next few minutes. Jared, let's start with you. First of all, thank you for coming on the show. And can you explain for the folks out there what exactly the Problem Solvers Caucus is?
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of the only caucuses in the House of Representatives that is made up of both Democrats and Republicans. And I think when you look back over the last 10 to 15 years, a lot of the best work that's come out of the House of Representatives has been, the result of hard work done by the Problem Solvers Caucus or members of it, to include, myself and Brian in particular through the years, and also you, John, when you were in Congress. I think your last big effort with the Problem Solvers Caucus was the bipartisan infrastructure law.
Yeah, it was. I remember that fondly, but I also remember how much consternation it caused for the extreme elements of both parties. Anyways, Fitzy, Brian Fitzpatrick, I call him Fitzy because he's a good friend of mine. Brian, could you tell us, you're co-chair of the caucus. What do you hope to achieve in your role as co-chair?
Yeah, thanks for having us, John. It's a two-party group. We believe in two-party solutions. It's a Noah's Ark rule. If you want to join, you have to find someone from the opposite party to join with you. So we're a 1-to-1 ratio that try to advance two-party solutions and bipartisanship in Congress, which sounds like a strange concept in this climate, but our goal is to not make it a strange concept, but to make it the norm and to take the same approach to government that we take towards our personal relationships, that you don't allow the perfect to be the enemy of the good. You take 80% of something over 100% of nothing. You come to the center, you try to see the world through the other person's eyes and advance a compromise consensus type two-party solution to all issues: healthcare, childcare, housing, affordability, taxes, foreign policy, you name it. It's basically taking the same approach to government that we take towards our personal relationships. It's not much more complicated than that.
So Jared, tell us, how often does a Problem Solvers Caucus meet and what goes on in those meetings?
Yeah, we try and meet weekly, John. Schedules are difficult trying to get a big group of members together, but basically weekly. Some meetings are more what I call informational or educational, where we'll invite some people in to talk about a core issue and how it's impacting them, whether that be healthcare or like permitting reform is a good example. Those are the types of meetings where we might start to see together, like what is the common problems that we can agree about. Other meetings are just members where we try and get into the nuts and bolts of hashing out a deal. One of the things I would say about the Problem Solvers is whether it's Brian, who I partner with on many issues through the years, or you, John, when you were in Congress, Fred Upton, Jamie Herrera-Buehler, every Republican that I have had a close relationship and worked closely with on something that got done for the country, it was a member of the Problem Solvers Caucus. And I think that's part of the beauty of the group. It's the relationships you form.
It's almost like we're exposing a nice secret about Congress, that actually Republicans and Democrats meet and they try and do things in a bipartisan manner. So, Brian, let's take one of your bipartisan efforts that you all are working on now and tell us basically what's going on with that to start with.
Yeah, so healthcare obviously is a big issue, is a massive issue. This current year, 2025, at the end of the year, the ACA premium tax credits are set to expire. And myself and Jared came up with a two-party solution, as did several other of our colleagues, to try to offer a two-party solution to send that to the Senate to hopefully have them pass it and at least deal with this piece of the healthcare puzzle. There's a lot of different cost drivers to the healthcare system. We have to unmask and drill down on all of them, but this is one of them. We can't ignore any of them. This is the most time sensitive, given that they're set to expire at the end of the year. And, we try to get a two-party bill to the floor. Since that option was taken off the table for us, we ended up signing a discharge petition, which is a mechanism to force a bill to the floor.
So let
for
me
a current
interrupt
extension.
you right there, if I may. You
Yep.
say you tried a two-party solution. I presume both of you tried to work with your own parties to get them behind it, and you faced headwinds. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Okay. So
But the beauty, John, the
Pardon me?
beauty is in the Senate, where they need 60 votes, they're going to take whatever the House passes and they're going to push for the deal that Brian and I have been working together on. That's a deal that can get Republican and Democratic Party votes.
So
And
how
that's a
did you
deal
go
that
about getting the
Dana's-
consensus to do what's called the discharge petition, which is something that's a kind of an esoteric rule where you basically go around leadership on both sides and force a vote on the floor? How did you guys go about building that consensus?
I think Brian and I have been working together on discharge petitions now for about 2 years. We started with the issue around funding for Ukraine. We kept the pressure on through those discussions. We didn't successfully pass a discharge, but we did keep the pressure on both Democratic Party and Republican Party leadership to ultimately do something more in regards to that conflict in the Ukraine. We did it again successfully recently, Brian and I, where we didn't agree that the president should just be issuing an executive order to do away with collective bargaining rights that were already in place and negotiated and agreed to. So Brian and I did a discharge petition. It took us about 4 or 5 months, John. But one of the things I want to point out is we've really learned to create space. The process, the steps that you take and how you sequence it can determine whether or not members of both parties feel comfortable coming along with you and signing on, and even how you message it and talk about it. You have to be careful that it's a message that doesn't alienate the other side. And I think Brian and I have learned how to put forward that type of partnership in the Congress now over 7 years of working together.
So, Jared, I appreciate you. Even though you have daddy duty going on, you're doing double duty here, and we really appreciate that. Brian, I want to give over to you now. What are some of the things you hope to achieve going forward other than the Affordable Care Act? And how important is it for you to be working with the Problem Solvers Caucus? How important is that to Congress overall?
It's everything, John. George Washington, in his farewell address in 1796, warned of the dangers of the two-party system. He was very prophetic, an amazing president for a whole host of reasons, including that. And here we are, 2025, about to enter 2026, and the strains are really tugging at the threads of our Constitution because of the two-party system, because of hyperpartisanship. And the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus are really a pressure relief valve for that. We're providing space for members that want to approach government like they approach their personal relationships, that believe in two-party solutions, that believe in not allowing the perfect to be the enemy of the good, and getting something done. It's the same way that people manage their businesses, manage their households. We're just trying to take that same approach to government. And as far as what we look forward to in 2026, first week or second week of 2026, our caucus will be unveiling what will ultimately manifest in the Problem Solvers Caucus's affordability agenda for 2026, where we're going to identify all the pressure points in families' budgets, whether it be healthcare, childcare, housing, what have you, and unmask all the cost drivers that are latent and part of each of those elements of families' budgets, and try to provide relief for them. So that's going to be our project that we look forward to aggressively moving forward.
So I think I speak on behalf of all Americans when I say that I dearly hope that you continue your missions in a bipartisan manner in Congress. The American people want them now more than ever, and you're 100% right when you say that we compromise all the time in our private lives and in our business lives, and we should be doing the same in Congress, and there's not enough of it. But thank you both very much. We wish you a Happy New Year, and now it's time for my take. Bipartisanship isn't some abstract theory. It's about agreement between two parties that usually oppose each other. But it's not just essential to good politics, it's essential to us all. At its core, bipartisanship is about compromise. No business deals get done without negotiation, some give and take. The same is true for families, friendships, and workplaces. Yet somehow that basic truth often vanishes when we get to Washington. We need leaders on both sides of the aisle who are willing to do what's right, not just what's politically expedient. That means voting one's conscience, not one's job security. In fact, it's that belief in cooperation in my own bipartisan record in Congress that led me to be asked to host a show called Balancing Act. The idea was simple: create a place where political issues are discussed honestly, respectfully, and without party blinders. So, when you're choosing your next political leaders, look beyond party labels. Look at character, because character counts, now more than ever. And that's my take. Well, that's all for this week, folks. To send in your comments for the show, or to see Balancing Act extras and exclusives, follow us on social media, or go to balancingactwithjohnkatko.com. Thank you for joining us, and remember, in the circus that is politics, there's always a balancing act. I'm John Katko. We'll see you next week, America.